We begin with breaking news. Edmonton police have confirmed 2 officers were killed early this morning while responding to a call. There was a large police presence near the neighborhoods of Inglewood and Woodcroft. Now, according to internal police communication shared with CTV News Edmonton, the officers were dispatched to a domestic dispute call at an apartment building. The memo goes on to say the officers were shot by a male subject who is also dead. A female is in hospital in life-threatening condition. Edmonton Police Chief Dale McPhee is set to make a statement at noon. Well, CB24's Christina Tenalia is standing by with the latest on the story from Edmonton. Christina.
Yeah, so we'll find out more at this 12 noon news conference. Jamie, deeply disturbing. 2 Edmonton police officers shot and killed in the line of duty. Of course, this is not only deeply disturbing for the Edmonton community and those across the country, but for the police force, who is not only tasked with investigating what took place here in some capacity, at least to start, but then also grieving the loss of these 2 officers. Here in Ontario, OPP Commissioner Thomas Carrick tweeting, "The thoughts of all OPP members are with the families and colleagues of the 2 Edmonton police officers tragically killed in the line of duty this morning in Edmonton." Speaking of the OPP, we want to bring in former OPP Commissioner and CTV's public safety analyst, Chris Lewis. Chris, thank you so much for joining us in what is truly terrible news this morning. Take us through this here, because sadly, even here in Ontario, as you know, and as we've discussed, we have had a number of police officers killed in the line of duty in the last few months, truly damaging not only to the community, particularly the families of these officers, but also the police force that grieves this loss.
That's right. It's just horrific, really devastating to think that we lost so many so quickly. The worst months of statistics in police deaths in Canadian history, in my view. But ultimately, we've got a police service in grief out there. They are attending the scene of the murder to their colleagues. And at the same time, the city of Edmonton churns on, and police have to respond to calls for service and go to domestics and other calls that are obviously very dangerous to them. So there's a tense investigation there. Now we're told that the suspect is dead. How that occurred, we don't know yet. But of course, they have their version of SIU in Alberta, and they will be investigating the death of that individual. And of course, an investigation by police into the murder of 2 of their own. So lots on the go, lots of balls in the air, and much more detail to come forward.
Chris, you know, officers daily have to walk into precarious scenarios. They have to respond to calls where they don't know what they're walking into. I want to share with our viewers again here, according to internal police communication shared with CTV News Edmonton, the officers were dispatched to a domestic dispute call at an apartment building. The Edmonton Police Service says the officers were shot by a male there and died in hospital. What do officers do when they are responding to a precarious situation, a domestic call, where there could be, of course, already with a domestic call, already incidents of violence?
That's right. And when they get those calls, the call taker in the police dispatch center will get as much information as possible. What's the threat? Are there firearms or weapons in the house? Has there been any threats of violence? And also run checks on those involved as much as they can, as much as they detail as they're given. And from that point on, when police get there, they're very careful. They don't just go charging in the door. They listen and try and get a handle on what's going on before they make a decision to knock on the door or to enter the residence. So, you know, and they go to many of these domestic situations 24/7 in all police services in Canada. And 99% of them end up with maybe an arrest without a lot of violence, but they're never routine. They're obviously calls that can go violent, either from the male or female or both, depending on the various situations that they're faced with. So, and from that point on, once they get in there, they have to deal with what they find, and sometimes things like this occur.
Chris, quite frankly, how do officers avoid being ambushed? You will recall this awful tragedy here in Ontario quite recently, a few months back, an officer responding to a vehicle in the ditch at the side of the road, trying to help these people out, shot and killed. You know, some situations, officers, like a domestic, the information might be limited. Officers go and knock on the door, and essentially, how do they avoid walking into a situation where they are put in harm's way, or what do they do in those situations, considering they're there to help someone?
Well, a lot of us, the response is based on the information they receive through dispatch, and the dispatchers and call takers get as much as they possibly can to help. And then from that point on, they have to rely on their training and their equipment. And police officers in Canada are very well trained, better than ever in our history, very well equipped. But sometimes things just happen. All the street smarts, all the training and agility and senses and everything else that go into it aside, sometimes bad things happen. And in this case, obviously, they didn't know they're going to be met with gunfire. Very similar to the situation in South Simcoe last fall, where two officers went into a disturbance within a family residence and, of course, were both shot and killed. So was it a setup? Was it ultimately, were they ambushed? Obviously, they didn't know they were walking into gunfire when they entered that residence.
Chris, it is so disturbing. Officers are tasked with ensuring public safety, and that is what they do. And they put themselves in harm's way every day. And in this tragedy in Edmonton this morning, 2 officers shot and killed. They ended up dead. Okay, our public safety analyst, CTV's public safety analyst and former OPP commissioner, Chris Lewis. Chris, thank you so much for your time and analysis this morning. Jamie, so again, we anticipate that news conference from Edmonton Police in about 45 minutes' time, about 50 minutes' time. I'll send it back to you.
Thanks for that report, Christina.